Captain Sable Trent had seen better mornings, but this one took the cake for worst. The UES Hesperia was hanging in the void like a tin can at a shooting range, surrounded by an alien fleet that looked like it was designed by someone with a grudge against aesthetics. The Zalthar Collective, a group that apparently loved pointy ships and even pointier negotiations, had them in their sights, and they weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. "Well, I guess we're not in Kansas anymore," Sable muttered, staring at the main view screen which displayed a very organized chaos of Zalthar warships. Their formation was tighter than a miser's purse strings. Her first officer, a man who answered to the name of Colt but looked like he'd answer to a slap equally well, leaned over, squinting at the display. "I dunno, Cap. I always thought Kansas would be less. Murder why?" "Yeah, well, I don't see any scarecrows or wizards around to help us out," Sable replied, drumming her fingers on the console. "Just a bunch of space hedgehogs with delusions of grandeur." The Hesperia had been limping through space after a minor skirmish turned into a major disaster. They'd blipped into what they thought was home territory, only to find themselves in a dimension where the maps were as useful as a chocolate teapot. Now, surrounded and cut off from help, Sable's crew was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Incoming transmission, Cap," said Garth, the communications officer with the personality of wet cardboard but a knack for sarcasm that could slice through the hull. "Great," Sable sighed. "Let's see what the neighborhood watch has to say." The screen flickered and a Zalthar commander appeared, all scales and menace, his expression the universal sign for "I eat humans for breakfast." "UES Hesperia, you are surrounded. Surrender immediately or be destroyed," the alien barked, his voice like gravel in a blender. "Good morning to you too," Sable replied, putting on her best fake smile. "Can I interest you in a timeshare instead?" The Zalthar commander blinked, not quite sure what to make of human humor. "You have 1 minute to comply," he growled before cutting off the transmission. "Charming fellow," Colt noted dryly. "Yeah, bet he's a hit at parties," Sable replied, her mind racing. "All right, team ideas. We're in a parallel universe with a pissed-off alien armada and no backup. Suggestions." Tricia, their engineer, piped up from the corner, wiping grease on her jumpsuit. "We could try reversing the polarity of the—" "No," Sable cut in. "No more Star Trek solutions." Tricia shrugged. "Worth a shot. Anyone else?" Sable asked, looking around at her motley crew. They were a ragtag bunch, each one of them an expert in their field if their field was making bad decisions. "We could try diplomacy," Colt suggested, though his tone didn't sound convinced. "With what? A fruit basket," Sable shot back. "We could always play dead," Garth chimed in, his voice as flat as ever. "I mean it works for opossums." "Yeah, and how's that worked out for them as a species?" Sable retorted. "Okay, let's just think this through. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and possibly out of our minds. There's got to be a way to turn this around." Tricia's console beeped, drawing her attention. Cap, sensors are picking up something weird." "Weirder than this?" Sable asked. "Looks like some kind of temporal anomaly," Tricia replied, eyebrows knitting together. "Could be the reason we're in this mess." "Great, so we're not only lost in space but lost in time too," Sable grumbled. "Can we use it to our advantage?" Tricia hesitated. "Maybe if we can harness the anomaly, we might be able to slip back to our own timeline." "And how exactly do we do that without blowing ourselves to bits?" Colt asked, skepticism filling the room. "That's the tricky part," Tricia admitted, her voice fading into the background as the Zalthar fleet loomed ever closer. Sable took a deep breath, scanning the faces of her crew. "We've faced worse, folks. Remember that time on Raxel Prime?" "You mean the time we almost got eaten by those giant space slugs?" Garth deadpanned. "Exactly," Sable said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We might have to bluff, beg, or barter our way out of this, but we're not going down without a fight." The crew nodded, their resolve solidifying. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and they were nothing if not desperate. "All right," Sable declared, turning back to the view screen. "Let's give these Zalthars a show they won't forget." The plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Use the anomaly to create enough confusion to make a hasty retreat. If they couldn't outgun the Zalthars, they'd outsmart them, or at least distract them long enough to make an escape. Trisha, I need you to brew up something to get their attention, Sable ordered. Like a temporal firecracker, Trisha asked, already flicking switches and twisting knobs. Something like that, Sable confirmed. And Colt, ready the engines for a quick getaway. The ship hummed to life as systems powered up, the hull creaking like an old man getting out of bed. Garth kept a steady eye on communications, ready to feed the Zalthars whatever nonsense they needed to hear to buy time. They're hailing us again, Garth reported. Stall them, Sable instructed. UES Hesperia, your time is up, the Zalthar commander announced, his patience thinner than cheap toilet paper. Just a moment, Garth replied, as if they were busy with something trivial. The captain's currently indisposed. Can I take a message? The Zalthar commander's eyes narrowed, his scales bristling with irritation. You will surrender or be obliterated. I'll put you down for not interested then, Garth said, cutting the line before the alien could retort. Trisha slammed a lever forward and the ship vibrated, the anomaly pulsing around them like a heartbeat. Here goes nothing, she muttered. The Hesperia shuddered, the temporal anomaly wrapping around the hull like a shimmering cloak. For a moment, everything felt stretched, time and space pulling like elastic. Hold on to something, Sable warned as the ship lurched forward. The Zalthar fleet, caught off guard by the sudden burst of, well, whatever it was, faltered. The Hesperia blasted through the confusion, the anomaly warping the space around them, creating mirages of ships and sensor echoes. It's working, Colt shouted, his hands deftly maneuvering the controls. For now, Sable replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding like a jackhammer. As they zipped past the Zalthar ships, the fleet scrambled to adapt, like a herd of cats suddenly introduced to a laser pointer. Keep it up, people, Sable urged, adrenaline spiking as they threaded their way through the chaos. It was a wild ride, the ship bucking and weaving as the anomaly did its thing. The crew clung to their stations, determination etched into every line of their faces. It was do or die, and they weren't in the mood for dying. Almost through, Colt announced, the ship breaking free of the Zalthar net. But just as relief washed over them, a new signal pinged on the sensors. Another fleet, bigger, badder, and angrier than before. You've got to be kidding me, Sable groaned, slumping back in her chair. The crew exchanged glances, their brief victory overshadowed by the new threat. Well, Sable said, a grim smile tugging at her lips. Looks like we're not out of the frying pan yet. And into the fire we go, Colt added, grimacing. The Zalthars were on their tail, the anomaly fading as the Hesperia pushed its limits. They'd bought some time, but it wasn't enough. Suggestions? Sable asked, her voice steady as ever. Try not to die, Garth quipped, his face impassive. Sound advice, Sable replied, eyes fixed on the view screen. All right, folks, let's see what else we can pull out of our hats. They were far from safe, but they were still here, still fighting. And if the universe thought it could get rid of them that easily, it had another thing coming. The UES Hesperia creaked and groaned as it attempted to slip away from the frying pan, or maybe it was the fire. Hard to tell when you're being chased by two sets of angry aliens who presumably have a very liberal policy on disintegration. Sable Trent, unflappable as ever, stood in the center of the bridge, hands on hips. All right, we've got a new problem, or rather the same problem but with a fresh coat of ugly. Let's take stock. Colt muttered something not entirely polite under his breath, pulling up the ship's resource log. Fuel's lower than a snake's belly and the power levels are flirting with zero. If we were a phone, we'd be screaming for a charger. Perfect, Sable said, though it was clear from her tone that it was anything but. What about weapons? Limited. We're about as threatening as a wet paper towel, Colt replied, his sarcasm wrapped in a layer of genuine concern. Sable sighed, tapping her fingers rhythmically on the armrest of her chair. Right, so we can't run and we can't fight. What can we do? We could always pray, Trisha suggested, though judging by her expression, She had as much faith in divine intervention as she did in the ship's shields. "Prayers are for people who can't come up with a better plan," Sable shot back. "Anyone thought of something a bit more proactive? How about we call for help?" Garth suggested, his voice too flat to indicate any serious hope. "Maybe someone out there isn't trying to kill us. Given our luck, the only ones likely to hear us will either ignore the call or join the party," Sable replied, skepticism dripping from each word. "But let's try it anyway. Garth, see if you can send out a distress signal. Make it sound urgent." "Urgent, you say?" Garth's fingers danced over the console. "How about, oh God, we're all going to die?" "Perfect," Sable said with a half-smile. "Now, Rin, what's the latest on our friends outside?" Rin Morley, their new communications officer, had been listening intently to the static-filled chatter of the Zalthar fleet, her expression caught somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "The Zalthars are getting antsy. Seems they don't appreciate our little disappearing act. Do they sound like they're considering a diplomatic approach, perhaps inviting us over for a nice cup of tea and a chat about peace?" Sable asked, though she already knew the answer. "More like they're planning to turn us into space debris," Rin replied, her voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that could cut glass. Sable nodded, considering their limited options. "We need to stay off their radar for as long as possible. How are we doing on that, Colt?" Colt shrugged, which was never a good sign when it came to staying undetected. "If we keep our power usage to a minimum, we might slip by." "But it's a gamble." "Everything's a gamble," Sable said, "and I'm not feeling lucky." "Captain, the Zalthars are repositioning," Garth interrupted, his tone about as enthusiastic as a funeral march. "They're closing in. Rin, keep your ear to the ground. Trisha, any chance you can squeeze a bit more juice out of this old bucket?" Trisha rolled her eyes, as much a fixture as the ship itself. "Sure, I'll just wave my magic wand. Maybe sacrifice a few chickens while I'm at it." "Just do what you can," Sable said, knowing full well that the engine room would soon be filled with Trisha's colorful vocabulary. With the situation looking as bright as a black hole, Sable leaned back in her chair, surveying her crew. They were the kind of people you'd want in a bar fight, or maybe they were the people who caused the bar fight in the first place. Either way, they'd been through hell together, and she trusted them with her life. "All right," she announced, her voice carrying a confidence that was half bravado, half sheer stubbornness. "We need to make the most of what little we have." "Ideas, we could surrender," Rin suggested, though her tone suggested she was aiming for humor, "and end up as Zalthar chew toys." Colt snorted. "Pass. How about a distraction?" Garth offered. "Something to draw their attention away while we slip out the back door. And what exactly do we have that could distract a fleet of homicidal aliens?" Sable asked, crossing her arms. "Well, if we can get close enough to one of their ships, we might be able to use the anomaly to create a ghost image," Trisha suggested, her eyes glinting with mischief. "A holographic decoy," Sable said, considering. "It's risky." "Risky is our middle name," Colt pointed out. "Well, besides screwed." "All right, let's rig it up. Trisha, you're on engineering. Garth, work on the holographics, keep it convincing. Colt, get us in position." The crew scattered, each member set to their task with the focus of a cat stalking its prey. Sable stayed on the bridge, monitoring the progress and wondering if this plan had even a snowball's chance in hell. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity as the Zalthar fleet continued its relentless pursuit. The Hesperia's systems groaned, protesting the abuse with stubborn resilience. It was an old ship, but it still had fight left in it. "Decoy ready," Garth reported, a rare hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Let's see if they fall for it." "All set here," Trisha added, her voice crackling over the intercom. "Fingers crossed." "Colt, let's give them a show," Sable said. With a nod, Colt engaged the controls, piloting the ship with a finesse born of countless close calls. The decoy sprang to life, a shimmering ghost of the Hesperia, projected just far enough away to hopefully catch the Zalthar's attention. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Zalthar fleet hesitated, their formation splitting just slightly as they assessed the new target. "They're buying it," Rin reported, barely containing her surprise. "Don't sound so shocked," Sable replied. "Let's get the hell out of here while we can." The engines roared to life, the ship shuddering as it accelerated away from the pursuing aliens. The decoy continued to flicker, a tantalizing lure that drew the Zalthars ever closer. The plan was working. Against all odds, they were slipping through the cracks, leaving chaos in their wake. But just as they began to believe they might actually pull this off, the anomaly pulsed again, a ripple of energy that washed over the ship. Cap, I think we've got a problem," Tricia's voice crackled through the intercom. "Define problem," Sable replied, bracing for the inevitable bad news. "The anomaly, it's destabilizing. We've got maybe minutes before this whole area goes boom." "Of course we do," Sable said. "Because why wouldn't it?" "Suggestions?" Colt asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "Run faster," Garth suggested, though it was more of a formality than a real option. Sable considered their options, or lack thereof. They couldn't outrun an explosion of that magnitude, and the Zalthars were still on their tail, but maybe they could use it. "Tricia, can we trigger the anomaly early, directed at the fleet?" "Possibly," Tricia replied, her voice carrying the weight of uncertainty. "But we'd have seconds to get clear." "Better than sitting here waiting to be vaporized," Sable decided. "Do it." Tricia didn't need asking twice. Her hands flew over the controls, manipulating the unstable energies with a skill born from years of patching up the Hesperia's aging systems. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice, but it was all they had. "Everyone brace," Sable ordered as the anomaly flared, a blinding light that consumed the viewscreen. The Hesperia lurched, the force of the explosion propelling them forward as the Zalthar fleet vanished behind them, consumed by chaos. For a moment they were weightless, tumbling through space like a leaf on the wind. Then the ship stabilized, the engines whining in protest but holding together. "We did it," Colt said, disbelief etched into every word. "Yeah," Sable replied, her relief tempered by the knowledge that this was far from over. "But we're not out of the woods yet." The Hesperia sped on, leaving the remnants of the Zalthar fleet in the dust. It was a victory, however fleeting, and they would take it. But as they hurtled through the vastness of space, their resources dwindling and their options limited, Sable knew that the real challenge lay ahead. "All right," she said, turning to her crew with a wry smile. "Let's see what other miracles we can pull out of this hat." Because if there was one thing she knew, it was that the universe wasn't done with them yet, and they weren't done fighting back. The UES Hesperia kept limping through the void, like a one-legged man in a three-legged race, the aftermath of their daring escape leaving the crew with adrenaline hangovers and no aspirin in sight. Sable Trent, the captain who didn't ask for this disaster but got it anyway, slumped in her chair, scanning the bridge with a gaze sharp enough to cut through the hull. "All right, team," she announced, the word team tasting a bit like sarcasm. "We've managed to piss off the Zalthars, blow up a cosmic anomaly, and somehow still be alive. I'd call that a win, but I've seen what counts for wins in this job, and I'm not impressed." Rin Morley, the new communications officer who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, rubbed her temples. "Captain, communication lines are still buzzing with Zalthar chatter. They're not too happy about the fireworks show. Surprise, surprise," Sable muttered. "Did they RSVP for round 2, or are they just going to shout obscenities from a safe distance? More like planning to get cozy with our aft end." Rin replied, glancing at her console as if hoping it might turn into a cocktail bar. Colt, the ship's resident pessimist with a side gig in navigation, sighed. "We're down to fumes, Captain. The engines are running on hopes and dreams, and we're fresh out of both." "Sounds like my kind of party," Sable said, her mind working overtime on too little caffeine. "We need a distraction. Something to keep those pointy bastards busy while we come up with a way to not die." At that moment, Dex Calder, the ship's engineer and unofficial destroyer of any lingering optimism, wandered onto the bridge. His jumpsuit was stained with what might have been engine grease or possibly breakfast. I heard something about distractions, he asked, voice as dry as a sandpaper desert. Sable nodded. We're in need of one. And before you say it, no, we're not sending Colt out there with a sign saying, "Eat me," Dex snorted. If we're gonna throw someone out there, it'd be more effective if they could sing. Sable raised an eyebrow. What are you getting at? Dex leaned against a console, arms crossed. Remember those ancient entertainment systems we got tucked away in storage? We could rig them to broadcast on all frequencies, throw out enough junk data to muddy their sensors. Old Earth classics, Garth added, leaning in with a smirk. Nothing says screw you like blasting a bit of Beethoven's Fifth into the void. And how exactly does deafening them with opera stops them from blowing us up? Tricia chimed in, her skepticism as thick as her accent. We confuse them, Dex explained patiently, as if dealing with particularly slow children with a lot of noise. Their sensors get overloaded, gives us a chance to slip away. At least that's the theory. Great, so our survival hinges on the Zalthars hating classical music, Sable deadpanned, though the idea had a certain reckless appeal. What do we need to pull this off? Dex straightened, his face lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm you only find in people who know they've got a chance to blow something up. First, we need access to the entertainment archive. Then, I'll just need a bit of time to cobble together a transmitter, and some duct tape. Lots of duct tape, of course, Sable said. Nothing like a bit of interstellar slapstick to get us out of this mess. How long will it take? Dex considered, scratching his chin. If I don't get distracted by running commentary from our lovely crew, I'd say about an hour. We might have that long before the Zalthars come knocking, Colt muttered. Let's hope your plan's got more legs than our fuel gauge. Speaking of legs, I'll need a hand, Dex added, already moving towards the engineering deck. Tricia, you're with me. Garth, find something loud and obnoxious. Colt, plot us a course that looks like a drunk pigeon's flight path, anything to throw them off. Nice to know my talents are being put to good use, Tricia grumbled, following Dex with all the enthusiasm of a cat being led to a bath. Sable watched them go, a wry smile on her lips. Well, if nothing else, we'll go down as the most annoying humans ever encountered by the Zalthar. Could be our legacy, Rin added, her voice a mix of humor and resignation. Who else can say they tried to fend off an alien armada with Mozart? Let's just hope they're not secret symphony fans, Sable said, her eyes on the stars they raced past. Otherwise, we're really screwed. The bridge settled into a tense silence, each crew member lost in their thoughts or perhaps just trying to avoid thinking at all. There was little to do now but wait and hope. Minutes crawled by, each one heavy with the weight of the unknown. Finally, Dex's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding tinny but triumphant. We're ready, Captain. Just say the word. All right, Dex, start the music. Let's see if we can make this work. Back in engineering, Dex flicked a few switches, a grin splitting his face as the ancient system's whirred to life. The speakers, dusty from years of neglect, burst into sound, a cacophony of classical music, heavy metal, and a few choice selections of 20th century pop. Eat your heart out, Zalthars, Tricia muttered, adjusting a loose wire. On the bridge, Sable watched the data stream across her console, the Zalthar fleet hesitating, their movements faltering as the music did its work. It's working, she breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. Looks like they didn't prepare for Bach, Rin said, her voice light with disbelief. Sable allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. All right, Colt, let's get moving. Dex, keep the noise going as long as you can. On it, Captain, Dex replied, his tone conveying both confidence and a hint of mischief. As the Hesperia slipped through the cracks, weaving a path through the chaos they'd created, Sable felt a flicker of hope. It was foolhardy, perhaps, but it was also unmistakable. We might just pull this off, she said, more to herself than anyone else. On the bridge, the crew worked in concert, each piece of the puzzle fitting into place with a precision born of desperation. Colt kept them on course, his hands steady on the controls despite the chaos around them. Rin monitored the communications, her eyes darting between screens as she tracked the Zalthar's confused signals. "This is insane," Garth said, shaking his head. "I can't believe it's actually working." "Don't jinx it," Sable warned, glancing at him with a smirk. "We still have a long way to go." The ship hummed with a nervous energy, the crew's collective tension a palpable force. Every second felt like a lifetime as they skirted the edge of disaster, their lives hanging by a thread. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the cacophony of sound cut out. Silence fell like a shroud, heavy and oppressive. "Dex?" Sable asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Sorry, Captain," Dex replied, sounding sheepish. "We blew a fuse. It'll take a few minutes to fix." "A few minutes we might not have," Sable muttered, her mind racing as she considered their options. "We're still flying," Colt said, his calm voice a balm in the chaos. "We've got some time. Let's hope it's enough," Sable replied, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. In engineering, Dex and Tricia worked with frenzied precision, their hands moving in a blur of motion. Sparks flew as they cobbled together makeshift repairs, each one a testament to their stubborn refusal to give up. "Almost there," Tricia said, her voice tight with concentration. "Good," Dex replied, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool air. "Because I'm running out of miracles." On the bridge, the tension was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity. Sable watched the readings on her console, willing the Zalthars to stay confused just a little longer. Come on," she murmured, her fingers drumming a restless beat on the armrest. Finally, Dex's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "We're back online, Captain. Let's give him hell." The music blared to life again, a triumphant roar that echoed through the ship. The Zalthars, already wavering, faltered once more, their formation breaking as they struggled to make sense of the chaos. "Nice work, Dex," Sable said, relief flooding her voice. "Anytime, Captain," Dex replied, his grin audible even over the crackling connection. With the Zalthars in disarray, the Hesperia pushed forward, slipping through the gaps in their defenses with all the grace of a dancer and the subtlety of a charging bull. "Keep it up, everyone," Sable urged, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. "We're almost there." The crew worked in harmony, each member playing their part with the kind of reckless abandon that came from having nothing left to lose. They pushed the ship to its limits, each jolt and shudder a reminder of just how close they were to the edge. But against all odds they were doing it. They were surviving, and in the end that was all that mattered. "All right," Sable said, her voice carrying a note of steel. "Let's get out of here." As the Hesperia surged forward, leaving the chaos behind, Sable allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done the impossible and lived to tell the tale. For now, at least, they were still flying. And in the cold, indifferent depths of space, that was victory enough. The Zalthars were nothing if not persistent, much like a rash that refuses to go away despite liberal applications of interstellar ointment. Their pointy ships buzzed around the UES Hesperia like angry hornets, trying to make sense of the musical madness blasting from every frequency. But as the saying went, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with Beethoven. Or at least that was the hope. On the bridge, Sable Trent leaned back in her command chair, momentarily basking in the absurdity of their situation. It was one of those rare moments when survival against all odds felt almost within reach. Almost. She glanced at Colt, who was furrowing his brow over the navigation console, looking like he'd just been asked to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. "How's our drunk pigeon routine holding up?" she asked, breaking the silence. Colt grumbled, his fingers dancing over the controls. "Well, if the Zalthars are expecting us to fly in a straight line, they are in for a disappointment." "Perfect." Nothing makes a day better than disappointing an alien armada. Rin Morley, the communications officer with a talent for looking both bored and mildly annoyed at all times, snorted. "I bet the Zalthar analysts are pulling their hair out trying to figure out if we're brilliant strategists or just idiots. Can't we be both?" Garth chimed in, tapping away on a secondary console, trying to keep their signal as erratic as possible. I mean, look at us. We're playing cosmic hide-and-seek with a civilization that could probably vaporize us with a sneeze. We're not dead yet, Sable pointed out, trying to inject some optimism into the room. That's got to count for something. Yeah, like a last-minute reprieve from the executioner, Rin muttered, her eyes flicking over the incoming Zalthar chatter, which sounded like a mix between intense confusion and frustrated swearing, if aliens indeed swore. Meanwhile, Dex and Tricia were elbow-deep in cables and fuses down in engineering, like two mechanics trying to keep a very angry washing machine from exploding. Sparks flew at random intervals, adding a nice touch of danger to their already hazardous situation. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Tricia asked, handing Dex a tool that looked like it belonged in a medieval torture chamber. "Constantly," Dex replied, grimacing as he tightened a connection. "This is exactly why I joined the spacefaring workforce. To fix things with spit and duct tape while aliens try to kill us." "You're living the dream," Tricia said, rolling her eyes. "Dream? More like a nightmare that forgot to end," Dex grunted, pulling a piece of equipment free. "Okay, I think we've got power stabilized for now, but I wouldn't bet my life on it holding." "Good thing we're not betting lives," she said brightly, though her expression said otherwise. "Well, at least our odds are better than a snowball's in hell," he said with a shrug. Emphasis on slightly. Back on the bridge, the mood had shifted slightly. The eclectic mix of music and zigzag flight pattern had kept the Zalthars at bay, but there was a palpable tension, like the pause before a storm. Sable decided it was time to do what humans did best when faced with impending doom: ignore it by focusing on something else entirely. "All right, crew," she said, standing with an air of authority that was only slightly undermined by the thin layer of dust on her uniform. "We need to keep our spirits up. Suggestions? How about a game of Spot the Cosmic Disaster?" Colt suggested dryly. "Winner gets the satisfaction of predicting our demise. Morbid, but I like it." "Other ideas? We could share some stories," Rin offered, surprising herself with her willingness to engage. "You know, reminisce about the good old days when we weren't on the hit list of a galactic superpower." Garth chuckled. "I've got one about the time I accidentally locked myself in an escape pod for 6 hours. Spoiler alert, it was the worst 6 hours of my life." Sable grinned, nodding. "All right, let's hear it. And anyone else with embarrassing stories, feel free to chime in." As the crew settled into a slightly more relaxed atmosphere, their stories mingled with the gentle hum of the ship, an eclectic mix of blunders, near misses, and the occasional triumph. It was the kind of bonding experience that only imminent peril could forge, bringing them together in a way that daily monotony never could. "And then there was the time I tried to fix the coffee machine," Rin admitted, holding her hands up in surrender. "Turns out, I'm better at breaking things than fixing them." "Coffee came out looking like engine oil. Sounds like a vast improvement over Dex's usual brew," Colt quipped. "Hey," Dex's voice crackled over the intercom, a defensive edge in his tone. "I make excellent coffee. It's just an acquired taste." "Right, because nothing says pick-me-up like a beverage that doubles as paint stripper," Sable said, chuckling. The stories continued, each one a testament to the crew's resilience, their ability to laugh in the face of adversity, a skill as crucial as any technical expertise. It was a welcome distraction, one that reminded them of their humanity even as the universe conspired to remind them of their mortality. But just as the crew was beginning to relax, a new alarm sounded, a shrill reminder that the universe had a twisted sense of timing. "What now?" Sable asked, more resigned than annoyed. Colt squinted at his console, his expression darkening. "Looks like a mechanical failure in the primary drive system. Could be serious, could be." "Colt, please, I need more commitment to the doom and gloom." "All right, it's definitely serious." "Happy, ecstatic," Sable muttered, rubbing her temples. "Dex, what's your status?" Down in engineering, Dex and Tricia exchanged a look that was equal parts frustration and determination. "We've got a problem with the drive, Captain," Dex reported. "Something's gone haywire with the stabilizers. Can you fix it? Sure, if you give me about 4 hours and a miracle. You've got 30 minutes and a prayer," she replied. "Think you can pull it off?" "I'll give it my best shot, but someone should probably start writing our eulogy just in case." "Way to keep things light," Tricia said, diving back into the tangle of wires with him. On the bridge, Sable watched the Zalthar ships on her display, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The aliens were still trying to make sense of the chaos, their formation erratic and their communication garbled. It was only a matter of time before they figured out the Hesperia's trick and moved in for the kill. "We need to buy some more time," she said, her voice low. "How?" Rin asked, her skepticism apparent. "Suggestions?" Sable asked, looking around the bridge. Garth shrugged. "We could always try taunting them. I hear yo mama jokes are universal. Or we could just hope Dex doesn't blow us up in the process of saving us," Colt suggested. Or Sable said, cutting through the banter, "We keep broadcasting, pushing the limits of what we can mess with. Maybe throw in some jazz, really confuse them." "Jazz? You're a madwoman," Rin joked, shaking her head. "Desperate times, desperate measures," Sable replied. "All right, Garth, see what you can do to keep our signal unpredictable." The crew returned to their tasks, each of them acutely aware of the ticking clock. Every minute was borrowed time, every second a gamble. But in the end, that was what space travel was all about, rolling the dice and hoping the universe wouldn't snake eyes you into oblivion. In the heart of engineering, Dex and Tricia worked furiously, their movements a blur of determination and desperation. "We're gonna need to reroute power," Dex said, his voice a strained whisper as he focused on the task at hand. "Tricia, keep an eye on the levels. If we overload, it's game over." "Understood," she replied, her eyes glued to the readouts. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity as they fought against the inevitable. The ship groaned around them, metal protesting the strain of their efforts. But bit by bit, they clawed their way toward stabilization, their progress as tenuous as a spider's web in a hurricane. And then, finally, Dex's voice came over the intercom, weary but triumphant. "Captain, we've got the stabilizers back online. For now, anyway." "Great work, Dex," Sable replied, relief clear in her voice. "Colt, how's our course?" "We're still zigging and zagging like a drunken bumblebee," he said, sounding almost cheerful. "Perfect. Let's keep it up." The crew settled back into the rhythm of survival, a harmony of humor and grit that made even the darkness of space seem a little less daunting. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, but the game was far from over. For now, they'd continue to dance on the edge, defying the odds with every breath they took. And as the galaxy spun around them, indifferent to their struggles and triumphs, the crew of the UES Hesperia carried on. Not because they believed in miracles, but because they refused to give up the fight. Because in the vastness of space, survival was their legacy, stubbornness their greatest weapon. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough. The lights on the UES Hesperia flickered like a faulty neon sign outside a dive bar, and the ship shuddered with all the grace of a jittery toddler on a sugar high. This was how you knew things were about to go from bad to catastrophic. Captain Sable Trent grimaced, her mind a tangled mess of half-baked plans and sheer desperation. "We're hitting new lows, folks," she announced, her voice crackling over the intercom. "Life support's going down the crapper unless we pull off a miracle worse than the coffee." Rin Morley's voice came back, dripping in sarcasm. She leaned against her console, managing to look both bored and annoyed, a skill she'd perfected since day one. "Much worse than the coffee," Sable confirmed. "Which, incidentally, we might need if things get much dicier. Nothing like a boiling cup of Dex's paint stripper to wake the dead." "Like necromancy in a cup," Colt chimed in, his eyes glued to his control panel as he fought to keep their course erratic. "But seriously, Cap, we need a solution." Down in engineering, Dex Calder was already knee-deep in solutions, or at least, what passed for them. The heart of the Hesperia was a tangle of wires and circuits that even its designers would find bewildering. Dex and Tricia navigated it with the deftness of two desperate surgeons operating on a very sick patient. "Tricia, how's our power reroute going?" Dex hissed, prying open a panel that looked like it might explode at any second. "Like trying to keep a sieve afloat," Tricia replied, elbow deep in a maze of cables. "But hey, at least it's not boring." "Boring would be a blessing," Dex muttered, yanking on a wire that refused to cooperate. "Sable, this might take a bit longer than planned. We're juggling dynamite down here." "Well, let's hope you're a better juggler than comedian," Sable shot back, the hint of a smile in her voice. "We've got Zalthar party crashers thinking about boarding, so we need life support back sooner rather than later." "Perfect. Just what we needed, uninvited guests," Dex grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'll try not to blow us up." The tension on the bridge was palpable. Rin was listening to the Zalthar chatter, which had escalated from confused static to something with a more sinister tone. It wasn't long before she voiced what everyone was thinking. "They've stopped swearing," she said, frowning. "I think they've figured out we're the idiots who blew up their cosmic anomaly." "Right, because we didn't have enough problems already," Garth muttered, turning to face Sable. "Captain, if they board us, what's our play?" "Improvise," Sable replied, deadpan. "And pray they're not immune to sarcasm." The ship's lights continued their erratic dance, casting eerie shadows that made everyone look like they were starring in a low-budget horror flick. The Zalthar ships, meanwhile, were closing in, their pointy designs like malevolent insects drawn to the Hesperia's chaos. "Any minute now they'll make their move," Colt remarked, squinting at the display. "And here I was hoping for a nice, quiet evening." "Quiet is overrated," Sable replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We've got this, sure, and I'm the Emperor of Mars," Garth quipped, though he was already limbering up, ready for a fight. Back in engineering, Dex was on the verge of a breakthrough, or a breakdown. "Tricia, if we can just stabilize the power flow." "Got it, Dex." "Just say the word," she replied, fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist on speed. "All right," Dex said, his voice taut with concentration. "On three, 1, 2, 3. With a final, desperate yank, Dex rerouted the power. The lights flickered once more and then, miraculously, stabilized. The hum of life support began to sound like the sweetest music, a signal that they'd dodged yet another bullet. "Life support's back online, Captain," Dex reported, sagging against the wall with relief. "For now, anyway. Nice work, Dex. You might have just earned yourself a promotion," Sable replied, her voice buoyed by the small victory. "Great. Does it come with a raise?" He shot back, knowing full well that in space, currency was measured in air and food rather than credits. "Only if we survive," Sable said with a chuckle. Now, about those Zalthar bastards. The Zalthar chatter had reached a fever pitch, lines buzzing with ominous intent. Sable knew it was only a matter of time before they attempted to board. And while their ship might have fancy weapons and the ability to make their lives hell, there was one thing the crew of the Hesperia had in spades: stubborn, unyielding human spirit. "All right, team," Sable said, bringing everyone onto the line. "Assume they're coming for us. We make them regret it, like we have a choice," Rin murmured, her hand resting on the console as if bracing for impact. "Hey, at least they're giving us a challenge," Colt added, trying to keep the mood light. "Wouldn't want things to get too easy, right?" "Easy's for wimps," Garth agreed, cracking his knuckles with a grin. The ship's alarms blared again, signaling the breach attempt. The Zalthars were getting serious, and the Hesperia's defenses were as thin as a politician's promises. Sable took a deep breath, steeling herself for the chaos to come. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Ready as I'll ever be," Rin replied, her expression set with determination. "Let's show these alien pricks what we're made of," Garth said, his grin turning feral. The sound of metal on metal reverberated through the ship as the Zalthars began their assault, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Each crew member was locked into their roles, a band of mismatched heroes facing down the odds with nothing but grit and gallows humor. Sable stood tall, her mind churning through strategies and contingencies. If the Zalthars wanted a fight, they'd get one hell of a welcome party. And if it was their last stand, well, they'd go down swinging. "All right, crew," Sable declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Let's give these pointy bastards something to remember." As the crew braced for the onslaught, the bridge became a symphony of controlled chaos, each person a vital note in the fugue of survival. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of their minds. But if space had taught them anything, it was that the only certainty was uncertainty. The Zalthars burst onto the ship, their sleek armor like a second skin, moving with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless battles fought and won. But they hadn't met the crew of the Hesperia before, and they hadn't dealt with the sheer audacity of humans fighting for their lives. The corridors of the Hesperia were a blur of motion and noise. Garth was in his element, wielding a makeshift weapon with a flair that suggested he might have missed his calling as a circus performer. Colt, usually the one guiding their ship through the galaxy's insanity, was proving equally adept at guiding his fists into the faces of Zalthar invaders. "Garth, how's it looking on your end?" Sable barked over the intercom, ducking behind a bulkhead as a stray shot sparked against the metal. "Like a bad day at a Zalthar rodeo," Garth shouted back, his voice filled with a mix of strain and exhilaration. "But we're holding them off for now." "Good, keep it up. We're not letting them take this ship." "Wouldn't dream of it, Cap," he replied, his voice brimming with that reckless human defiance that had kept them alive this long. In the heat of battle, Rin found herself grappling with a Zalthar who looked as if it could bench press a small planet. She ducked its swing and retaliated with a swift kick to the shin, a move that, while undoubtedly effective, left her feeling like she just kicked a steel girder. "Note to self," she panted, stepping back to catch her breath. "Don't pick fights with aliens twice your size." "You're doing great," Rin, Sable encouraged, her voice a beacon amidst the chaos. "Remember, we're all in this together." The skirmish raged on, the crew of the Hesperia using every trick in the book, and a few they'd invented on the fly, to keep the Zalthars at bay. The odds were stacked against them, but the crew had long since learned that fate tended to favor the bold and the slightly deranged. In engineering, Dex and Tricia were reinforcing the ship's remaining defenses, praying it would be enough to stave off the worst of the invasion. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the ship's hull a reminder of how close they were to disaster. "If this works, maybe we should take up gambling," Tricia quipped, her hands moving with practiced ease over the controls. "Gambling's for suckers," Dex replied, his focus unwavering. "We're betting with our lives, and we don't get a second chance." Despite the odds, the crew fought on, each of them driven by a stubborn refusal to give up. It was a quality that had seen them through the darkest times, a testament to the resilience that came from living on the edge of oblivion. As the fight continued, the Zalthars began to falter, their initial momentum blunted by the sheer tenacity of the Hesperia's crew. It was a moment of triumph, a fleeting victory snatched from the jaws of certain defeat. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Zalthars regrouped, readying themselves for another assault, and Sable knew they were far from safe. Still, as she looked around at her crew, battered, blooded, but unbroken, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. "All right," she said, drawing a deep breath and steadying herself for the next round. "Let's show these bastards what we humans are made of." With a renewed sense of determination, the crew of the UES Hesperia stood ready to face whatever came next, their spirits unyielding in the face of adversity. They were bruised, exhausted, and on the brink of disaster, but they were far from beaten. And as the galaxy spun indifferently around them, the crew prepared to fight on, driven by the hope that somewhere, somehow, they'd find a way to survive. Because in the end, that was all they had, their grit, their humor, and their indomitable will to live another day. The UES Hesperia was shaking like a delirious drunk at last call, and Captain Sable Trent was starting to feel like she was at the helm of a cosmic joke. But there was no punchline, just the creeping realization that they were about to be vaporized by some very pissed-off pointy ships. "Why haven't they finished us off yet?" Garth grunted, wiping Zalthar blood, or whatever passed for blood among aliens, from his knuckles. "Feels like they're dragging this out for sport. Maybe they're just as indecisive as you are about ordering lunch," Rin quipped, ducking a wild swing from a Zalthar invader. "Seems they can't make up their minds either." "Oh, I doubt it," Colt said, his voice crackling through the intercom. "They're more like indecisive executioners." "They want to savor the anticipation." Sable was about to retort when the ship's speakers crackled to life with a sound that was as unexpected as it was bizarre. The tinny strains of an old Earth waltz, scratchy and soft, like a ghost from a bygone era. "The Blue Danube. The hell? What in the unholy vacuum of space is that?" Dex shouted, his voice tinged with irritation and curiosity in equal measure. "It's its music," Tricia replied, blinking at the console as if expecting it to explain itself. "From Earth. Classic. I know what it is," Dex snapped. "I just don't know why it's playing." Sable's mind raced, searching for answers in the chaos. Had the ship's systems finally succumbed to the stress and decided to serenade them into oblivion? Or was this some cosmic prank, the universe's idea of a swan song? "Captain, you might want to see this," Colt said, his voice suddenly sharp and focused. "What is it?" Sable asked, moving to the nearest display screen. "The Zalthars," Colt said, as if that explained everything. When Sable's confusion didn't wane, he continued, "They've stopped. They're just floating there." Sure enough, the display showed the pointy ships, stationary and eerily silent, as if the music had cast a spell over them. What the hell was happening? Are they listening to this?" Rin asked, her voice steeped in disbelief. Dex, ever the skeptic, snorted. "What, you think they've suddenly developed a taste for human culture? Stranger things have happened." Garth grinned, though his eyes stayed wary. Sable seized on this unexpected pause. Maybe it was a glitch, or maybe it was an opportunity. "Colt, can you broadcast more of this?" "I could try," Colt said, already tapping away at his console. "You want a DJ request line, or what?" "Just do it," Sable ordered, the glimmer of a plan forming in the back of her mind. "Anything that might keep them distracted." Rin was staring at the screen like it might disappear if she blinked. "Can't believe our lives might depend on a playlist." "Welcome to my world," Sable said dryly, watching as Colt began to weave a tapestry of Earth's finest. Beethoven, Bach, and an unexpected detour into pop hits that somehow made the Zalthar ships twitch in their space, like cats hearing a can opener. "Keep it coming," Sable encouraged. "Let's see if we can make them second-guess this whole invasion thing." The minutes stretched into an eternity, the ship's crew caught between disbelief and the frantic rhythm of survival. On the display, the Zalthar ships drifted aimlessly, the alien chatter reduced to a confused babble. "Garth, can you get a read on their signals?" Sable asked, hoping for any sign that their little experiment was having an effect. "I've got half a mind to think they are confused," Garth reported, brow furrowed as he listened to the Zalthar communications. "This music is messing with their heads. Never thought I'd see the day when Bach saved my ass," Tricia muttered, half laughing, half incredulous. "What's the deal with aliens and classical music?" Dex wondered aloud, already diving back into his repairs with renewed vigor. "Guess even the most sophisticated warrior race can't resist a catchy tune," Rin replied, her usual sarcasm edged with genuine relief. Sable allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor this bizarre victory. Maybe, just maybe, they'd found a chink in the Zalthar armor. "Keep those tunes rolling, Colt. Let's see if we can buy ourselves enough time to figure out our next move." "On it, Cap," Colt replied, already rifling through a database that had suddenly become their most potent weapon. Space, for all its vastness and mystery, was suddenly filled with the absurdity of human creativity. The crew of the Hesperia clung to it like a lifeline, their laughter tinged with madness but carrying a core of hope. In the silence that followed, the ship's ragtag defenders shared a glance that spoke volumes. They were still in the fight, their grit and gallows humor the only things keeping them afloat in this sea of stars. "All right, folks," Sable said, her voice cutting through the lull. "Let's make sure we don't waste this reprieve. Dex, Tricia, get those systems patched up. Garth, keep monitoring their signals. Rin, Colt, stay on music duty." "Aye, aye, Captain," came the chorus of replies, each one threaded with a renewed determination. As the crew plunged back into action, Sable took a moment to look out into the void, where the Zalthar ships hovered like question marks. She'd come to expect the unexpected out here, but even she had to admit this was one for the books. "Let's show these pointy-eared bastards what it means to be human," she said softly, her voice carrying a spark of defiance into the dark. Meanwhile, the Zalthars were in disarray, their sleek, menacing ships now little more than floating question marks. Sable couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Here they were, a ragtag crew held together by duct tape and caffeine, and they'd managed to stall an invasion with a 20th century music collection. "Anything new on those signals, Garth?" Sable asked, leaning over his station. Garth shook his head, bemused. "Still sounds like they're trying to figure out what the hell a Macarna is." Sable grinned. "Good. Let's keep them guessing. Should we throw in some commercials?" Colt suggested, half serious. "Really mess with their heads, please don't," Dex groaned from the floor where he was elbow-deep in circuitry. "Last thing we need is aliens getting hooked on jingles. Can you imagine?" Tricia snorted. "Zalthar's humming theme songs. Won't know whether to laugh or cry." "Well, let's hope it works," Rin said, adding a few more tracks to their impromptu playlist, "because I'm almost out of ideas." "Don't you worry," Sable replied, a steely edge to her voice. "We've got plenty of fight left in us." The music continued to play, a soundscape of defiance, each note a challenge to the invading force. The crew worked tirelessly, fueled by adrenaline and the faintest glimmer of hope. They were outmanned, outgunned, and out of their depth, but they weren't out of options. "Not yet," Captain Garth called, drawing Sable's attention. "I think they are starting to pull back seriously." Sable's eyes widened, disbelief and relief warring on her face. "Looks that way," Garth confirmed, his fingers dancing over the keys as he analyzed the data. "They're falling back, regrouping. Seems like our little concert's making them jittery," Colt added with a grin. "Well, I'll be damned," Sable murmured, a small smile of triumph curling her lips. "Looks like we've got their number. They're probably thinking twice about tangoing with us now," Rin quipped, her usual sarcasm tinged with a hint of pride. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sable allowed herself to breathe, to let the tension ease from her shoulders. They'd bought themselves time and maybe, just maybe, a fighting chance. "All right, crew," she said, her voice steady and determined. "Let's not waste this opportunity. Keep the music going, and let's get this ship back in fighting shape." "Aye, Captain," came the chorus of replies, each one laced with a renewed sense of purpose. As the crew of the UES Hesperia worked to patch their battered ship, they clung to the absurdity of their situation like a lifeline. They'd faced down the Zalthar threat with little more than bravado and a soundtrack, and for now, that was enough. In the silence that followed, Sable looked out into the void, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. She'd always known space was unpredictable, but this was something else entirely. And as the crew of the Hesperia prepared for whatever came next, one thing was certain: they weren't done fighting yet. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk later, as the ship hummed with a renewed energy, Sable found a moment to reflect. They'd managed to turn the tide, if only temporarily, with nothing but a playlist and a whole lot of nerve. She chuckled to herself, shaking her head in disbelief. "Who would have thought?" she mused aloud. "Not me," Dex replied from where he was sprawled on the floor, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "But I'll take it. Hell of a day," Garth added, his voice ringing with admiration and fatigue. "Here's hoping we can keep it up." "We will," Sable promised, her words a vow. "We've got this." And as the galaxy spun on around them, indifferent to their struggles, The crew of the Hesperia prepared to face whatever came next, armed with nothing but their stubborn, unyielding human spirit. Because in the end, that was all they had. Their grit, their humor, and their indomitable will to live another day. And as long as they had that, they had hope. "Captain, those pointy Zalthar ships are pulling back." Colt's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding like he was announcing the return of a prodigal cat. "Looks like they are more interested in our music than in reducing us to space dust. You think they've got a thing for Earth's greatest hits?" Sable snorted, leaning over the console with the same grim determination one might reserve for a particularly stubborn stain. "Let's hope they think twice about picking a fight with DJ of our caliber. Who knew alien invaders would have such bad taste?" Rin chimed in, tapping away at her console. The boredom seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a kind of feral excitement. "They're probably debating whether to kill us or book us for a wedding." Dex groaned from beneath a pile of tangled wires, his voice muffled by the depth of his immersion. "I'll take a gig any day over a funeral, but can we please focus on something a tad more pressing? Like, oh, I don't know, not dying out here." "Good point, Dex," Sable replied, her mind racing at warp speed. "All right, here's the plan. We need to use this distraction to make a run for it." "Run where exactly?" Tricia asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm and the faintest tinge of desperation. "In case you haven't noticed, our maps are as useful as a chocolate teapot. The ship's screwed 6 ways from Sunday, we're low on power, and our life support's hanging by a hair," Colt reminded everyone, not quite managing to hide the tremor in his voice. "You got a magic trick hidden up your sleeve, Captain?" "Let's just say I've got a card to play," Sable replied, already moving to the ship's resource log. "We're going to use what little juice we have left for a temporal jump." "A temporal jump," Garth repeated, his disbelief palpable even through the intercom. "You mean the thing that's about as reliable as a politician's promise?" "That's the one," Sable confirmed, a grin spreading across her face that was more defiant than sane. "It's risky, sure, but staying here's a guaranteed loss. We've got a chance, and I'm damn well taking it." Dex finally crawled out from his mess of wiring, looking like he'd just survived a wrestling match with a particularly aggressive vacuum cleaner. "I've got the systems as patched up as they're gonna get. Might hold together, might blow us to high heaven. But hey, what's life without a little excitement, right?" "Right," Sable agreed, nodding to herself. "Everyone, strap in and hold onto something that looks like it won't come apart if you sneeze." As the crew scrambled to secure themselves, the ship's lights flickered ominously, as if the Hesperia itself was having second thoughts about this whole endeavor. Sable pushed those doubts aside and focused on the task at hand. "All right, everyone, this is it," she announced, her voice carrying over the ship's intercom like the last call at a bar you never wanted to leave. "On my mark, we're jumping." "Wait, what if we end up in the middle of a sun?" Rin piped up, the grin in her voice belying the seriousness of her question. "I've got sensitive skin." "Then you won't have to worry about SBF ever again," Sable shot back, her hands moving deftly across the controls. 3, 2, 1, mark. With a shudder that felt like the universe itself was being ripped apart, the UES Hesperia lurched forward, the stars outside the viewport stretching and blurring as they were pulled into the vortex of the jump. For a moment everything was chaos, alarms blaring, lights flashing, and the ship groaning as though it was on the verge of falling apart. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The ship settled with a jolt, the lights flickering back to life as the alarms quieted. Sable opened her eyes, half expecting to be floating in the afterlife, only to find herself very much alive and still on the bridge of the Hesperia. We're alive?" Tricia asked, her voice filled with genuine wonder. "Looks that way," Sable replied, unable to keep the grin from her face. "Dex, what's our status?" Dex, who'd somehow managed to remain upright throughout the ordeal, checked his console with an air of cautious optimism. "Systems are holding steady, Captain. Looks like we pulled it off." "Huh. Suck on that, universe," Colt whooped, punching the air in triumph. "Don't celebrate just yet," Rin cautioned, her eyes scanning the readouts with a practiced eye. "We've still got to figure out where the hell we are." "Wherever it is," Garth added, "the Zalthars aren't here. And for now, that's good enough for me." Sable nodded, allowing herself a moment of relief before the weight of their situation came crashing back down. They'd bought themselves time, but they weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. "Okay, let's get to work," she ordered, the steel back in her voice. "We need to assess our situation, figure out our next move, and get the ship as operational as possible." The crew sprang into action, each member slipping into their roles with a familiarity born of necessity. They'd survived one hell of a gamble, and now it was time to capitalize on their victory. "Captain," Tricia called, her voice tinged with excitement. "I've got something on the sensors." "Looks like a habitable system nearby." "A habitable system," Sable echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "You're not pulling my leg, are you?" "Wouldn't dream of it," Tricia replied, her grin audible even through the static. "It's not much, but it's something." Sable exhaled slowly, a sense of cautious hope beginning to seep into her bones. Maybe, just maybe, they'd found a lifeline. "All right, set course for that system. Let's see if Lady Luck's still on our side." As the Hesperia limped toward its new destination, Sable allowed herself a moment to breathe. They'd faced overwhelming odds and somehow come out the other side. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And as the ship sailed through the stars, the crew of the Hesperia knew one thing for certain: they'd live to fight another day. Whatever came next, they were ready. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was defying expectations in the most unexpected ways. The UES Hesperia coasted through the void, held together with duct tape, hope, and a playlist of classical music that had somehow become their ace in the cosmic poker game. Within the battered hull, the crew moved with a frenetic energy, driven by the twin forces of survival and sheer disbelief at having pulled off the temporal jump without becoming an interstellar cautionary tale. Captain Sable Trent stood at the helm, her fingers drumming on the console as she watched the star-speckled expanse. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was the blackest kind, and yet here they were, still one step ahead of obliteration. "Tricia, how's our course?" Sable asked, her tone more casual than the situation warranted. "Steady as she goes, Captain," Tricia replied, her voice brimming with a mix of relief and residual panic. "I've got us aimed at that habitable system. With any luck, we won't crash land into a nest of God knows what." "Luck," Rin snorted from her station. "That's a four-letter word we ought to stop using. Remember what happened last time we relied on it? We nearly became alien confetti. Wasn't that bad?" Dex chimed in. "I mean, we're still here, aren't we?" "Yeah, Dex, and that's the scary part," Rin shot back with a grin that could curdle milk. "The universe clearly has it out for us, and we just keep refusing to die. It's almost an insult." Sable allowed herself a wry smile. "Insult the universe long enough, and maybe it'll just give up trying to kill us." "Ever think of that?" "Sure, Captain," Colt replied over the intercom, his voice tinged with a mocking bravado. "And maybe pigs will fly out of airlocks too." "Hey, we could use the bacon," Garth added, his tone suggesting he'd welcome the absurdity if it meant breakfast. Dex sighed, returning to his console where the screens flickered with the faintest hint of uncertainty. "Let's just hope this system has something we can use. I'm running out of spit and duct tape. Just keep us running, Dex," Sable said. "No one wants to find out if our life support system holds a grudge." As the crew fell into a tense rhythm, the Hesperia hurtled toward the distant system like a cosmic bottle rocket. Every creak and groan of the ship was a reminder of the razor's edge they walked, a soundtrack of impending doom scored by the universe's most indifferent composer. Tricia leaned over her console, squinting at the readouts. "Captain, I've got visual on the system. Looks like a couple of planets, one with potential." "Potential for what?" Rin asked, leaning back in her chair with the practiced nonchalance of someone who'd accepted their fate as cosmic cannon fodder. "Living, preferably," Tricia retorted. "But I'm sure we could arrange a quick death if you're in a hurry. Let's aim for living, Sable interjected before Rin could fire back. Set a course for the promising one. Copy that, Tricia said, fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist performing a death march. ETA in a few hours, assuming nothing else decides to go wrong. Always a big assumption, Colt noted with a dry chuckle. If something doesn't go wrong, I might just keel over from shock. Garth, who'd been silent for a while, chimed in with a sardonic grin. Hey, just remember, folks, no matter what happens, it's better than being pointy ship fodder. That's a low bar, Garth, Dex muttered, but there was a hint of agreement in his tone. As the Hesperia glided closer to their potential salvation, Sable felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like a neutron star. She'd gotten them this far, but it was only halftime in the game against Fate, and Fate had an unbeaten record against optimism. Captain, we've got company, Tricia called out suddenly, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. Company. Sable's mind leapt to the worst conclusion like a seasoned pessimist. Friendly or the exploding variety, hard to say, Tricia replied, her eyes glued to the monitors. But they're not Zalthar, if that makes you feel any better, marginally, Sable said, scanning the data. All right, crew, keep your wits about you. Let's see what's coming our way. As the distant shapes resolved into something less ambiguous, Sable's heart did an odd little flip. Ships, albeit ones that weren't trying to turn them into space debris. That was a start. Looks like they're hailing us, Tricia announced, her finger hovering over the comm button. Want me to put them through? Go ahead, Sable said, crossing her arms and adopting the kind of posture that said she meant business. Or at least that she was pretending to. A voice crackled to life over the speakers, smooth and polished like a politician on a good day. UES Hesperia, this is Captain Voss of the RVS Intrepid. We picked up your distress signal and came to offer assistance. Assistance, huh? Rin muttered under her breath. Hope it's not the kind that involves probing. Quiet, Rin, Sable said, though she couldn't help but chuckle. Captain Voss, this is Captain Sable Trent. We'd appreciate any help you can offer. We've had let's call it a rough patch. Understood, Voss replied, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what rough patch meant in the cosmic scheme of things. We've got supplies and a mechanic on board. We'll be there shortly. Sounds too good to be true, Garth said, casting a skeptical glance at Sable. Think they want something in return. Maybe, Sable conceded, but right now I'm willing to take a gamble. Besides, we're fresh out of better options. As the Intrepid drew closer, the crew of the Hesperia braced themselves for the encounter. Trust was a scarce commodity in the universe, but desperation had a way of loosening its grip. Well, here goes nothing, Dex said, watching the docking procedure on his screen. Let's hope they're friendlier than they look. The ships docked with a metallic thunk that reverberated through the Hesperia's hull. Sable resisted the urge to take a deep breath, knowing she'd be holding it until this played out. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, revealing a cotter of uniformed figures that looked more competent than hostile. At their head was Captain Voss, a man with the kind of easy confidence that either inspired trust or made you want to punch him, depending on your mood. Captain Trent, Voss greeted, extending a hand. Pleasure to meet you in less than ideal circumstances. Likewise, Captain Voss, Sable replied, shaking his hand with a grip that bordered on vice-like. Thanks for coming to our rescue. Looks like you've had quite the adventure, Voss said, glancing around at the battered interior of the Hesperia. Don't worry, we'll get you back on your feet. Much appreciated, Sable said, relaxing slightly but keeping her guard up. What's the catch? No catch, Voss assured her, and there was enough sincerity in his voice to at least make it plausible. Just doing our part to keep the universe a little less hostile. Well, in that case, welcome aboard our humble ship, Sable said, gesturing them inside. Mind the mess. As the crews mingled and the repairs began, Sable allowed herself a moment to step back and observe. The Hesperia might be a patchwork nightmare, but it was their patchwork nightmare, and seeing it come back to life was a relief she hadn't dared hope for. I suppose this means we're going to live to fight another day, Rin said, sidling up to Sable with a smirk. or die in a more spectacular fashion. Either way, it's a win. Nice to know you've still got your priorities straight, Sable replied, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie that came from surviving the kind of ordeal that ought to be illegal. Let's just focus on getting out of this mess first. As the hours ticked by and the repairs progressed, the Hesperia slowly transformed from a death trap back into something resembling a ship. The crew moved with a renewed purpose, buoyed by the prospect of returning to their own timeline with an intact hull and a few new allies. Captain Trent, Voss said, pulling her aside as the work continued. I've got to say, your crew's got spirit. It's not often you see that kind of tenacity. We're stubborn, if nothing else, Sable replied with a self-deprecating grin. Never met a cosmic obstacle we didn't want to headbutt. Here's hoping it serves you well, Voss said, nodding toward the viewport where distant stars twinkled like a billion indifferent eyes. What's your plan once you're back up to speed? Figure out where we are, where we're going, and how not to piss off any more aliens, Sable said, ticking off the points on her fingers. In that order, preferably. Sounds like a plan, Voss said, offering a nod of respect before turning back to oversee his crew. Captain, navigation's back online, Tricia called out, her voice carrying a note of triumph. Looks like we're on the right track. Sable felt a surge of relief, tempered by a healthy dose of skepticism. Get us moving as soon as we're ready. I'd rather not press our luck. Luck's got nothing to do with it, Captain, Dex said, appearing with a triumphant grin. It's all about skill, sure, Dex, Rin said, rolling her eyes. Tell that to the universe next time it tries to kill us. As the Hesperia pulled away from the Intrepid, Sable felt a strange mix of gratitude and longing for the stability they'd traded for adventure. The universe was a vast, uncaring place, but somehow, against all odds, they'd carved out a little corner for themselves. And maybe, just maybe, that corner was enough to keep them going. As they settled back into their routines, the crew reflected on their ordeal with the kind of gallows humor that had become second nature. Think they'll write songs about us? Colt mused, stretching his arms as though he could shrug off the weight of their journey. Sure, Garth replied with a grin. Ballads of the stubborn idiots who just wouldn't die. Catchy, Tricia said, laughing. I can already hear the chorus. Let's just hope we give them a happy ending to work with, Sable said, her gaze fixed on the distant stars that promised both peril and possibility. Because in the end, that was what they did best. Defy the odds, challenge the cosmos, and refuse to go quietly into the void. It was a game no one expected them to win, but then again, they'd never been much for listening to expectations. The universe might have had its way, but the crew of the Hesperia had a few surprises left in them yet. And as long as they had each other, the stars would just have to get used to their stubborn, irrepressible existence.